So, good afternoon to all of you. Again, here I welcome you to the sixth webinar now in the series Challenging the Status Quo, Taking Libraries into the Future. And it's sponsored by de Gruyter Brill and designed exclusively for librarians and information professionals. So today's panel will explore the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in academic institutions. And our esteemed speakers today will cover practical steps to foster inclusivity and highlight the library's role in ensuring equal educational opportunities for all. So without further ado, I will pass the baton on to our moderator team, which is, as always, the lovely Linda Bennett and Annika Bennett from Gold Leaf. Your videos are turned off and audio as well, but please write all of your questions, ideas, and anything you would like to write into the chat, and we will endeavor to answer all of your questions. The session is also recorded, and I shall send to you the PowerPoint presentations and the recording to you afterwards. So please enjoy, and I will hand over to Linda. Chair Linda, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So we're welcoming two very distinguished speakers today. I've heard both of them speak before, and they've both blown me away before. So we're really grateful to them for agreeing to do this, and particularly as it's unsociable hours for both of them. Roxanne did actually offer to speak from Canberra, which is where she lives, and that would have been in the middle of the night. She is actually in Singapore at the moment, but it's still 10:30 at night there, 11 o'clock now, I think. And Jeff is on the East Coast of America, so it's very early in the day for him. So thank you both for accommodating our times. We're going to start with Roxanne, and Roxanne is a lady of many, many talents. I've heard her speak on many subjects. She's also occupied all sorts of librarian roles, not just as an academic librarian. She is currently the University Librarian and Chief Scholarly Information Officer at the Australian National University. She's also a publisher for ANU, and she is an expert on archives, press, records, privacy, copyright, and digital scholarship. She's also worked as a Commonwealth Parliamentary Librarian and at the National Library of Australia. And she has many other roles as well, which you can see if you looked at the bios on the website. So, Roxanne, would you like to start this session, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you to de Gruyter Brill for running this series. I have really enjoyed all of the presentations, and it is a great privilege to be part of this event today. So thank you so much. I'm just going to prove I can use the technology by sharing the screen. If anything goes wrong, it is completely user error. Okay. Slideshow. Press the right button from the beginning. So thank you so much for organising a session on this topic. The whole issue of diversity, equity and inclusion is extremely complex, and preparing for this made me really think about the different interests and different dimensions of the players in the scholarly information ecosystem. And some of the thinking and consultation that I did in order to do this made me think differently about the issue. So this has just been really thought-provoking for me. So I'd like to start by saying welcome in the words of the Ngunnawal people, Ayuma. And I'd like also to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands I would normally be meeting, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and particularly to acknowledge any Indigenous people in the session. So today I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then I'm going to talk about some of the insights that we had into the role of the players in the scholarly ecosystem from a review we did at ANU Press, which was academic-led, which gave me some completely different insights to what I had as a librarian. Then I want to talk in particular about what we've been doing around Indigenous knowledge and rethinking our practices, talk a little bit about implications in open knowledge for diversity, equity and inclusion, which is not always a rosy picture, and then try to articulate a few things about library and academic responsibilities and how bringing them together gives us a slightly different perspective on the future than we might see in a lot of the discussions that we've had up till now. I've started with an image from NAIDOC Week, which is our annual National Aboriginal Week in Australia, and this was a 2002 theme, Show Up, Stand Up, Get Up, and this has continued to be a theme within our university, really to say we need to take responsibility. It's not enough just to be an observer. Sorry. So it is a critical topic for our time, something we haven't solved, something that's emerged, and something that we actually are seeing, sorry about this, in the literature as a challenge that is fundamentally one that is needing us to rethink every aspect of our services. Collections, reference, collaboration, and the principles in which we operate. I've started just with a reference, and there is, pardon me, a reference list at the end with a recent article from Library Journal, which posted DEI, posed it as one of the 3 threats to the whole library profession. And I also put in a couple of covers of reports in Australia that are really provoking us to think differently in a national as well as a local context around these issues. So diversity, equity and inclusion are very multidimensional. Not only are they multidimensional in our library, they're multidimensional in theory and also in social practice, which our universities are involved in as part of making societal change within our countries, within our communities. In thinking about how that actually fits within a theory framework, I'm a great fan of Rawls, and he talks very much about how justice needs to be a first imperative, if you like, not just a virtue of social institutions such as universities. And we really, really need to think deeply about this to ensure that there is equity at the highest level. He talks about the challenge of operating with a veil of ignorance, where we don't know what gender, race, abilities, taste, wealth or position in society individuals have, and we think that makes us fair. But in fact, he argues that that makes us unfair because we are not aware of the depth of issues and that we need to slough off the veil of ignorance that has protected us, and often, of course, been a part of the institutional environment in which we sit. So he challenges us to think about what are the equal liberties that we have, and of course we're challenged back by those that are often seeking to change our liberties through book banning, through institutional practices. But we really need to think on a principle basis as well as practical basis, is my argument, about how we implement a just library system and a just university system. So I want to start by talking about the perspective of our academics. So as Linda said, I'm responsible for the ANU Press, and we, 2.5 years ago at the Press, we started talking about diversity, equity and inclusion, which was a very interesting opportunity for us because we are the largest publisher of works on Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the scholarly environment. We are one that also is a very large publisher of works on underrepresented communities in Asia and the Pacific. So we thought we were doing pretty well. We created an academic-led committee that was primarily academics, supported by an academic. And there were some remarkable discoveries that we made in the conversations that we had with the academics about what they thought, particularly equity and diversity meant in the scholarly community, in the scholarly publishing community. They saw that it wasn't often in publishing, scholarly publishing, we talk about it as, well, what is the representation of the workforce, or what is the representation of the outputs? But this committee took quite a different view and challenged us to, in essence, look at how we could be encouraging content that was diverse, not just in terms of the people whose voices were represented, but also the disciplinary practices. And one of the issues that engendered this discussion was a disagreement we'd had after a book had been published, where every author was male on strategic studies. And so part of the conversation that our academics had was the, if you like, discipline-based biases that we have within a number of disciplines, and how the press and the editorial board should take a very active role in making sure that either within those books or within the publications around the discipline, we had a variety of different disciplinary practices that were not just the normal accepted vision, because they saw that that was actually disadvantaging wider debate and also indicated a lack of inclusion. So I hadn't thought of that issue before we had had this academic environmental discussion. And you can see in here that we have a range of recommendations that we've been working our way through about including diversity, equity and inclusion at every single layer, from publication boards to the nature of publications, to the language we have around names, to guidance for authors, thinking about ICEP, but most particularly thinking about not being accepting of narrow and limited disciplinary practices as part of our institutional response to issues that are identified as important areas for publications in scholarly ecosystem. So we had a number of themes, really setting that strategic vision and policy, and that you couldn't undertake operational activities unless you embedded that strategic vision and policy in every meeting of the advisory committee, every meeting of editorial boards. The gap around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors was also one that we thought we should work on, even though we are the biggest publisher of scholarly works by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors. One of the challenges around this for institutions as well is that, as our last Vice-Chancellor was prone to very accurately say, every bit of research that is done in a university that is about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander policy issues actually reduces the impact of the university, because it is not widely cited. It is a specialist form of research, and it is often research that is focused on making information research analysis transparent to communities, so you are not going to get the traditional sort of impact measurements that our governments and our universities obsess about, and it won't contribute to the rankings. So this is a tension for publishers and for libraries, that if we want to support institutionally those voices, we need our organisation to understand that that is sometimes in contradiction to our emphasis on increasing rankings, increasing impact, but we need to take a strategic response in order to be able to act to provide a more just organisation. Again, the responsibility of editorial boards, and part of the philosophy of that was that it is everyone's responsibility. We can't just say it's the authors, we can't just say it's the press office staff, we can't just say it's the editorial boards. We actually need to have active programs by all of the actors that are engaged with the press. Barriers around readership. We are 100% open access press, so often we think, well, you know, we've solved the problem because it is open access. But in fact, the analysis that we did in terms of thinking about disciplinary practice is that there's a difference between open access and a difference between being discoverable, being able to be used in a context, And I guess the two examples of that, one positive one, that in fact by being in JSTOR and being accessible through more widely read traditional aggregators, we actually are much more heavily used than just straight open access titles that we have on our website. And the other problem is that sometimes some of the countries we wish to make research available to, and I will give the example of Myanmar here, there are institutional restrictions on broadband in a non-democratic country. That means that even though we are publishing the materials open access, it's not possible to effectively download it within that country. So we've got to think about these new barriers. We've got to think about ways of achieving equity, achieving justice in terms of access beyond just an open access mantra. So there were a number of other issues that we had raised, and there is a program of activities that we are working on slowly but steadily. But the prime benefit of having this academic-led investigation and a set of very complex recommendations which were given to the board and distributed more widely around the university was that we were actually able to have a discussion in the open about these issues rather than just making assumptions like open access has solved the problem. So that really helped us see as a community within the Scholarly Services Division what the perspectives of the academics were and some barriers that we hadn't recognised. The second thing I want to briefly touch on is some of the challenges that are in the environment and becoming increasingly complex with issues like AI around making information available in a way that is genuinely equitable because of challenges like misinformation. So let's talk about Indigenous knowledge. One of the dimensions for us is not just what's in the collection, but what is the material that we are making accessible for other purposes, and what are the frameworks that we need to have around that in order to be aware of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights. In Australia, we don't have legislation around this. For academics conducting research, there is a framework, the national standards for ethical research that provides some guidance, but not a great deal of detail. And we've only just started the national consultation on what should be reflected in legislation that would implement the international treaties that the country has signed up to. It's very complex because a number of players have different concerns. The first tranche of legislation is most likely to be around the selling of fakes. So copies of artwork or copies in the style of artwork that have been created by non-Indigenous people that are being distributed cheaply and undermining the market. Because that is such a complex issue, and there's been a number of parliamentary inquiries, the more complex issues that we're looking at in terms of libraries, in terms of universities, probably won't happen for another couple of years. So really there's a big challenge for us to be informed and aware so that we can actually provide a program of sensible advice, and for us so that staff can feel competent. So we have started in our library an Indigenous program with an Indigenous leader that we've been working on part-time for the last 9 months to try and help staff be knowledgeable and to feel comfortable that even if they don't have all the answers, they know they can have a discussion within the division and within the library to be able to ultimately provide the best advice that we possibly can. So we've had Terry Janke, who is one of the Australian experts on applying this. She developed her True Tracks methodology through a PhD that she did at the Australian National University, and she runs a legal practice that provides assistance on these issues. And we have had her company in to do training, and that has really helped us think about, well, what do we need to be sensitive about? And we've had about 50 people do the training, and that was very helpful. There are issues in terms of looking holistically at Indigenous knowledge and the barriers that we put in place and the issues that we need to overcome in everything. So space design, we're thinking about now, how can we, particularly for the students come in, have them recognise when they come into the building that they are on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, that they are entering into a knowledge-based institution that has a particular role that in fact relates to the tradition of the lands on which the Australian National University is, of being a meeting and a knowledge place. And then how do we take that thinking and looking at our collections and discovery has been a huge journey for us. We're not there, and I don't think we should ever think that we are there, but by having these conversations, we've really been able to provide a safe environment for staff to talk about where there is uncertainty and where they feel concerned. And it is interesting talking to the academic community at the Australian National University. We, not December the year before last, adopted a program or a set of principles that have 3 graduate attributes for all of our students to achieve in their courses. And the first one is an awareness of Indigenous knowledge. They have felt a great deal of nervousness in trying to incorporate this into their practice. And we see our library staff echoing that nervousness, but by using sharing circles, by having discussions with Indigenous researchers, Indigenous students, we're able to have a bit of comfort, I think, in dealing with uncertainty and knowing that we're trying to do our best through this sometimes hotly contested area. When we sit back and we think about how we're going to then think about, having looked at the issues of publishing and different disciplinary biases and technical biases in the way we run the press, having looked at Indigenous knowledge, the third issue that we've been really trying to think about is how we can reframe our thinking about open knowledge, open science, and what can we do to frame a new way of delivering solutions, even though they're not the answer. As I said, just making things open access does not solve the problem of equity of access, of equity of content, nor of the sort of skills that we need to have in our staff to be able to have a program of activities that will ensure that the knowledge reaches the people that it should be reaching, and that we are, and I'm sure Jeff will talk about this as well, as my librarians, some of my librarians constantly remind me that there should be something in our collection, whether it's digital or print, that makes someone uncomfortable no matter what the issue is. So again,
can I just have a 5-minute warning now, please?
Okay, yep. So again, coming back to rules, how do we have an environment where we're aware of that challenge of breaking through that veil of ignorance and moving forward? So just a little bit more about open access. We're really trying to understand more with our community, our academic community, where they're hanging out, to use the modern language, and to make sure that we are delivering our open research, not just through our repository, but through connectivity with bioprint archives and other places. Open educational publishing is another way of moving over barriers, but again, it's about how do you actually connect the individuals rather than just collaborate. But I think we're seeing some new models here where we'll have some data by which to analyse what we're doing. Next, I wanted to say briefly that the read and publish agreements, whether they are transformative agreements or not, have made a step change that has actually not just increased the number of articles that are openly accessible, but for us, it's allowed us to have a deeper conversation with our academics about what they want to achieve and mechanisms that will get there. And I think framing this around equity requires us to have conversations that are about communities and access, not about the technical aspects of what is a transformational agreement, nor what is the complex process that you have to go through with different individual publishers. Finally, we really need to think globally about this as well, because the answer isn't that everyone will come to our individual libraries, but we need to think about frameworks, about international networks that will open us up and allow us to explore in a new way, breaking through some of those barriers. So navigating and bringing together concepts of people, processes, infrastructure, taking that data to be able to move forward is incredibly important. In coming to the end of this presentation, I wanted to emphasise that, in fact, our presidents and vice-chancellors of our universities have really been thinking about the issue about how to achieve social equity through greater access to knowledge. And I think this is an example from the International Alliance of Research Universities. But the challenge for librarians is to take the next step to say, we've got principles, we have frameworks around metrics, around measuring impact, but what are the next steps we can actually do that will make, in reality, the change that makes communities able to access their knowledge in an effective way, not just researchers who are able to do the technical communication. So I think publishers, librarians have new responsibilities. We've got a range of tools. We've tried to achieve a number of different things, but by working together and listening to each other, I think there's a whole new range of questions that we're going to be asking and answering in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Roxanne. That was absolutely stellar. We have got one question, but I don't want to field it yet because it's a question that I want both you and Jeff to take eventually. But just to ask you one single question, Roxanne, I know you're a great supporter of what might be called traditional publishers, the publishers that we've all heard of. And you've said that transformative agreements have gone a long way to addressing the supply side of open access articles. What about the creation of them? Do you think that publishers are taking on board that most authors still are male, pale and stale, if I may use the hackneyed phrase?
Oh, that's a really good question. So we've done some research about the motivation of researchers depending on the stage of their career, and we did that in humanities and social sciences because we knew science communication was relatively well understood, and we did find some really interesting patterns that were about people being influenced by their community. And we're actually running a series now, thank you to the publishers, on how to get published, where what we're trying to do is to give early career academics and higher degree by research students or PhD students lots of information on the diversity of options for them. And I've got to say, it's terrific, and we've had really good insights from publishers who are coming and not just pushing one model or themselves as publishers, but saying we need to think about who the audience is we want to reach, and we need to educate ourselves about that. And I think that needs to be a really, really strong debate that we have quite openly in order to upskill the new generation that's coming through about thinking about, you know, that terrible old term, dissemination of information in a new and different way. Though I should say, I just discovered that Australia's first Prime Minister in 1901 used the term dissemination of information when they were advocating for federation. So maybe there's a whole lot of aspects there that relate to rules as well.
Well, once again, thank you very much indeed. Don't go away, will you? So our second speaker is Jeff Carroll from Rutgers University. He's the Director for Collection Strategy at Rutgers. I first heard Jeff speak in New York in 2017, and he spoke about the future of the library then. I don't know if you remember that, Jeff. And you had a brilliant diagram of the future of the library. You absolutely blew everyone away on that occasion. So I know that you're a very accomplished speaker indeed. And you've also worked at Columbia and published yourself on scholarly communication and collection development with an emphasis on electronic resources management. And like Roxanne, you're very distinguished in many different fields. So thank you very much for doing this, Jeff, and please go ahead and give us your presentation.
Thank you so much, Linda. Let me just take a moment to get through this transition, which is the most nerve-wracking part. Okay, is that coming up on your screen? All right, I'll do the presentation mode. Does that all look good, Linda?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit about more specifically Rutgers and the great work that's being done by everyone at Rutgers to embrace this diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. Particularly, I'm going to try to illuminate the framework that the university president has put in place to help us understand this work better and to engage in it. Like Roxanne mentioned, this is really, I'll talk about journey a number of times, and I don't think there's really a destination or an endpoint because we will always need to do this work. If nothing else, the lessons we should have learned from World War II just keep haunting us, and the future keeps sliding into the past. We will always have something to address. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to try to wrap this up by 1:45, so we have time for discussion. 1:45 should make sense to everybody, no matter where in the world you are. But first, I also want to give Rutgers University's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we stand is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. We pay respect to Indigenous people throughout the Lenape diaspora, past, present, and future, and honor those who have been historically and systematically disenfranchised. We also acknowledge that Rutgers University, like New Jersey and the United States as a nation, was founded upon the exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. This map shows through the greens, the shaded green areas, the ancestral territories of the Lenape people. Rutgers, or New Jersey, I should say, spans about half of this territory from south to north there. Likewise, the campuses of Rutgers University span from south to north across all three sections of the green shaded areas, starting in the south with Rutgers University Camden, just across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. Rutgers University New Brunswick, the flagship campus on the Raritan River, about halfway up the screen in the transition between medium green and light green. And then Rutgers University Newark, which also has the Rutgers Biomedical and Health Sciences campus just across, it's on the Passaic River, just over the border from New York City. I'm also going to be taking some other historical, a step back historically to provide some context, coming up to the present, and then dropping back historically again from a different lens before we then hopefully end with a slide that's intended to be provocative about the future. We'll see how that goes. I also want to acknowledge that I am not an expert, far from it. This is a learning journey for me, and I'm deeply grateful to both de Gruyter and Goldleaf for this opportunity to be part of this discussion today. So thank you all for that. Stepping back to provide some context, there was a philosopher, Josiah Royce, in the late 19th, early 20th century. I believe he was not at Rutgers, he was at Stanford and then later at Harvard. His work was primarily around the philosophy of community. He described different types of communities. There are communities of hope, communities of expectation, groups of people coming together in hopes of getting something done or accomplishing something. We have to remember that there are also adversarial or predatory communities, and these are aimed at the destruction of others' causes and possibilities of loyalty. These type of communities tend to see things, interactions with other communities as a zero-sum game. In order for their community to gain something, the other communities have to lose something, and vice versa. And then he talked about the beloved community. This is an ideal. It's beyond what we encounter in life, a community fully dedicated to the cause of loyalty, truth, and reality itself. And so I like to keep that in mind, that there is no destination here, but moving us toward the ideal of the beloved community helps inform the work that we move forward with. And then later in the 20th century, mid 20th century, the great civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. brought this concept and introduced it the first time in his speeches at a speech in Buffalo, New York in 1956, and then continued to refine it through speeches until his death in 1968. So I wanted to provide some of this as context for the day our university president arrived at Rutgers. He came from Northwestern University in Chicago. He arrived on, he became the 21st president on July 1st of 2020, right in the height of the pandemic. He arrived at a campus that was closed and would remain closed for some time. There was no apparent community present except in an online forum. And he introduced this concept of a beloved community at Rutgers, building on those concepts of both Royce and Martin Luther King Jr. Some of the aspects that define this work is a commitment together to embody, reflect, and respect the complexities of all our parts. Rutgers campuses, as I mentioned in the land acknowledgement, stretch from southern New Jersey to northern and parts in between. These distinct locations and cultures make up a thriving university composed of students, faculty, and staff from all lived experiences. And this tapestry of identities, backgrounds, and experiences informs the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion across Rutgers University. Our beloved community must hold space for all of its inhabitants, even when we disagree. Even when we disagree, that just resonates so strongly with me. In today's polarized environment across most of the globe, we need to do the hard work of building community in which members trust each other enough to disagree and be able to have conversations around that are not violent. Protest and boycott is okay. But if we've done the work of building community, we should be able to work through these kinds of differences. Rutgers is also located in one of the most diverse states in the country, New Jersey, and it's one of our strengths. The president asks, was this intentional or happenstance? How we engage with this great diversity that we inherited is how we will be judged in the future. So building our beloved community needs to take this into consideration. We shouldn't be not only proud of having that diversity, but what have we done to make sure that that diversity is included in everything we do at the university? There are 8 single word terms that are used to help give context or meaning to the beloved community here at Rutgers: inclusion, difference, opportunity, access, innovation, leadership, global reach, and humanity. I want to talk a little bit about the work being done within the libraries then to fit within this overall context of building a beloved community. And we realize that the work must be done internal with staff at the libraries, as well as creating an environment, because the libraries is one of the few parts of the university that covers all campuses equally. It's very important that we provide the space, both physically and intellectually, for all members of that community. We've created a DEI committee, and that committee serves as an advisory body supporting 3 initiatives: respect and foster perspectives that reflect varying backgrounds, identities, roles, and their intersections; create and support structures and behaviors that promote equity, fairness, and justice; and promote an environment of belonging, respect, opportunity, and empowerment. And all of these 3 initiatives are aimed at both the internal staff of the libraries, but as well as all of the community that we serve. The DEI committee at the libraries is considered a learning committee rather than a committee of experts. It provides opportunity. It's primarily focused on DEI education. They've developed a glossary that currently contains 163 key vocabulary terms. This is partly meant to help us build a common vocabulary, an understanding of how to talk to each other about these issues. They've also structured this in a learning journey. They have set it up in the US. This kind of reflects the curriculum that is typical in an undergraduate education. 101 and 201, levels 101 and 201 are in place, with level 301 still in process and thinking about the future of learning. 101 is a self-initiated learning journey. It's self-paced, and it also provides different modalities based on a person's learning preferences, and includes 21 key terms from those from the DEI glossary that the group has put together. 201, for which 101 is a prerequisite, is then a book club, and this is coming together as a group to read common works on DEI so that we can discuss it together. And then, as I said, still in progress is level 301, the future of the learning journey. I think I have just a few more minutes left, so I'll try to get through some of this. I want to highlight some of the work the cataloging department has been doing. We call it reparative description. I'll breeze through this, and so I necessarily won't be giving it justice, but
do take your time, Jeff. You've got quite a bit of time yet, actually.
Okay. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, we usually do. Thank you.
Okay. What we want to do is make sure that the description in our catalogs is responsible and representative of our diverse communities and doesn't single or leave anyone out or dehumanize anyone. And so we're trying to go through our bibliographic records to address some of the issues there. Examples of these are rectifying ableist language, characterizing human beings based on their physical and mental abilities rather than separating those things, addressing the erasure and misrepresentation of people of color, creating equitable metadata, addressing racist language, correcting biased gendering and misgendering. And then that bottom bullet is intentionally exaggerated. I don't know if there's really a billion metadata records or billions of metadata records across the globe. But if you think of all the metadata records that we've created to describe things in cultural institutions throughout history, this is a potentially huge problem with the way we've described people. So it's a big effort that needs a whole community to get behind and work through. I want to give a little bit of history on this that goes beyond Rutgers, just because it represents how we can make progress, although it can take some time. And that's the Library of Congress subject heading illegal aliens. In 2014, there were a group of student activists at Dartmouth College that requested the term illegal aliens not be used in the Dartmouth College Library's catalog. In 2016, the Council of the American Library Association picked this up and passed a resolution calling the term dehumanizing, offensive, inflammatory, and even a racial slur, and urging the Library of Congress to change that subject. And then in 2021, the Library of Congress did change that subject heading. They replaced illegal aliens with non-citizens and illegal immigration. Now, bifurcating one subject term into two makes its own problems in trying to rectify that. But at least we now have a path forward of addressing other problematic terms in Library of Congress subject headings. The group that's working on this at Rutgers is also working on expanding it to all metadatas, including the library catalog, our institutional repository, and all of the finding aids we have for archival material. Huge effort. They're using additional thesauri to supplement Library of Congress subject headings. This includes something called the Homosaurus, First Nations Metis, Inuit Indigenous Ontology, Racial Equity Tools Glossary, and the AFS Ethnographic Thesaurus, just to name a few. And they're in the early stages of exploring how artificial intelligence might help us in this work, because if we don't figure out a holistic and automated way to do this, it's just going to take us forever. I also want to talk about something that is happening within the United States. The Justice Department in April has made a revision to the Americans with Disabilities Act to tighten up some of the requirements and make them more immediate. Primarily the way the act is written, it addresses state and federal government funded institutions, but it probably applies to private institutions as well, because within the original requirement, it's any entity that receives federal funding. Deadline for compliance of this is in 2026, so we have 2 years to work on this. We need to make all of the content that's available to our community accessible, and that includes the resources, the library resources that we contract with vendors and publishers to make. So this is a really big effort that we're going to have to all put our brains together. Fortunately, we do have some groups that are working on this already. The Library Accessibility Alliance in the United States, this is a group of consortia, library consortia that have come together to look at accessibility issues with library resources and then strategize ways to work with publishers and vendors to address them. So I think we do have some possibilities for coming into compliance broadly by 2026. I want to talk a little bit about open access policy. Rutgers enacted an open access policy in 2015 after having passed it in 2012. The aim was to help ensure greater visibility and impact for Rutgers research worldwide. And we have since implemented several read and publish agreements or transformative agreements, whether or not those are the same, as Roxanne pointed out. What we hope we are doing is creating a level playing field for Rutgers researchers. So whether they have the ability to pay for publishing their work open access or not, we're helping ensure that the results of research happening at Rutgers is available without charge worldwide. We also recognize that APCs are problematic. A researcher who isn't fortunate enough to be at an institution that can negotiate these read and publish agreements is out of luck and has to go with the traditional model of publishing, and therefore their research doesn't have as broad a reach. So we see these read and publish agreements as a transitional stage to a broader open access. Stepping back again to take another look at history through a different lens, I wanted to highlight a work from Rutgers University Press, and it's called it's a 3-volume set called Scarlet and Black. Scarlet and black are the colors of Rutgers University. It's the colors worn by our athletic teams. It's the colors we identify ourselves as part of Rutgers. But this work from the outset states it a little bit differently. It uses the term scarlet and black to reflect on the bloodshed of slave labor and displacement of indigenous peoples in order to build the foundations for the university. It also states at the outset that this is not intended to tear Rutgers down, but to try to make us a better community going forward by acknowledging and embracing our painful past. The 3 books taken, the volume 1 is an early history of how the slavery and dispossession helped build the foundation for Rutgers University. Volume 2 is the Civil War up to approximately the end of World War II. And then volume 3 brings us up to the present, from post-World War II, in Making Black Lives Matter at Rutgers. This 3-volume set is also available on De Gruyter. And I also want to highlight how the whole thing was an effort by the whole Rutgers community, from administrators, instructors, researchers, students, the libraries archives, librarians, archivists, a wide group of people at Rutgers helped bring this work together. It explores the missing narrative of slavery and dispossession of Rutgers' founding and development and history. Rutgers was built on land taken from the Lenape, as we saw in the acknowledgement slide. Early construction of Rutgers employed slave labor. Founders, early benefactors, presidents, and administrators. Henry Rutgers himself, for whom the university is named, owned slaves. Streams of early funding associated with profits from slavery and revenues from land formerly owned by the Lenape people all helped build and fund Rutgers University. There's one little part in this, when I read, just gave me some chills. And in the research that the group did in bringing this work together, they found reference to a Black slave named Will. Only Will. We don't know his last name. And he helped lay the foundation for one of the early buildings on the old campus. And in acknowledgement of his work, a path was made between the old campus and the new campus that I walk on almost every morning. And after reading this, they've dedicated the path as Will's Way, made this plaque there to commemorate it. And not only just raising him and elevating him and his experience, but through him, other slaves who were involved in setting the foundations for the campus. And finally, this is the last slide. Some of you may recognize the image on the left. In the mid-1970s, 2 spacecraft, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, were launched to explore the outer planets of our solar system. Both have now left the outer reaches of the solar system. Both carry copies of the Golden Record. The Golden Record includes sound recordings and images that are meant to depict the broad diversity and cultures of this planet. And this struck me as an image that reflects to that concept of beloved community. What this does not carry, in case some other intelligent life somewhere out there someday encounters it, it doesn't carry a history of the pain and the bloodshed that occurred to try to build this beloved community. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Also the thought that these Voyager spacecraft, there is no destination. They're on a journey. Likewise, we are on a journey. Thank you very much.
Well, Jeff, I don't know what to say. Huge thanks for that. That was so thought-provoking and full of insights, as indeed was Roxanne's presentation in a different way. I am going to ask you one question, which someone's kind of preempted. I was going to ask this anyway, but Beverly Ashdown has said, Jeff talks about building a beloved community, including EDI. How easy was it to implement? And I was going to say to you, your president's obviously a very energetic person, and he's been in post for 3 years, but has there been any pushback? Has there been, is everybody embracing this, or is there any pushback to it, do you think?
So that's a complicated question, as always, but thanks for asking it. So I would say there's broad embrace of the idea of the beloved community and the work behind it and the necessity of doing this work. And I think he's really done a great job of creating a framework that we can work within because it's understandable. It gives us vocabulary to work with, and it also gives us a set of ideas to structure ourselves around. The reality is it's a big university, and there's always differences of opinions. There's always conflict. And I do very much appreciate, I mentioned building communities so that we have the trust so we can have conversations when we disagree. Not all of the faculty are behind everything he says, but I think that that's a healthy environment as long as we are able to talk about where there's disagreement in reasonable ways. I think the president has, he came on board in the height of the pandemic. He's faced a strike at critical times. He's faced these encampments on campus with protests. None of these are easy things, and you're always going to get criticism for that kind of stuff. But I think that what he's done is create this conceptual community, again, going back to Royce and MLK, Martin Luther King. There's no destination. We have to continue to do this work. And so I think the work itself is embraced. The day-to-day struggle to get there is a healthy conversation around our differences.
Thank you very much for that. That was very eloquent. Roxanne, could you come back, please? Thank you. So,
hello.
You've been at this a lot longer than Rutgers, but have you experienced not so much pushback, I imagine, in your cases, passive resistance to this, would you say?
So what I think I see occasionally is that some of the issues, like the disciplinary biases, are often so embedded in practice that we can be blind to them. And we cannot see issues until we sit back and reflect differently and talk as a community. And one of the things that I think is facilitated by, in our case, our last and current Vice-Chancellor, and certainly this echoes Jeff's situation, I think, is that creating an environment which says we believe the university has a social responsibility, however we frame that, and that leaders need to take actions that are appropriate to assist staff along this journey, whether they're academic staff or professional staff or both working together, creates an environment where people can respectfully disagree, people can have concerns that they're able to talk about out loud. I mean, one of the most controversial issues, I think, really is that tension between staff in our institutions who want to put material away and put warnings on it and not make it accessible because they're concerned that it represents or contains wording and truths that happened in the past, which are not comfortable and could be offensive, which is true. But what is the role of our institution? Is it to provide it with contextual information and to support greater scholarship? So I think that concept of it's not resistance, it's people with goodwill seeing it from certain perspectives, and for us as institutional leaders, creating an environment where we can have the conversations and not necessarily agree, but be able to seek advice from Indigenous communities for the large part, to be able to come up with steady, structured programs that will increase the social justice program that we're committed to, really makes a difference.
Thank you. And you've actually hit on the next question, which was the first question we got. And that is
Linda, can I just add one other thing on that question? Yeah. I did want to mention too that after setting up this framework, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office at Rutgers did a survey across the whole campus community, including staff, students, faculty, on how they perceive how well Rutgers is doing from a DEI standpoint. The results weren't hugely great, but it sets a baseline for us to be able to measure progress in the future. So I just wanted to add that there is some, while somewhat subjective, the survey does create something we can measure ourselves against in the future.
Thank you very much. One of the things that interested me in this was that I recently interviewed a German researcher who was very sceptical about DEI, and he said, "Oh well, every journal has to stick that in their policies, but you know, it's just kind of paying lip service to it." So I wondered, you know, if you would experience that. So this first question we were asked was, books are being banned in places like Florida, and how can a country as diverse as America allow such a thing? And where does this behaviour take us? And if I may add a bit to that, at the beginning of this year, I interviewed an American librarian, and it comes back to Jeff's point about Nazism, I think, right at the very beginning. And I interviewed this American librarian, and he said, actually, most of the discrimination comes from the left and not the right. Saying we don't think things like Mein Kampf in our life. What are your takes on censorship, both of you, and how it fits with this topic?
Jeff, do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and to the question in chat, the state of New Jersey also has schools, primary schools and secondary schools whose libraries or communities have banned certain books from their libraries. And there's often a call across the New Jersey library community to weigh in to try to overturn some of those decisions. You know, Roxanne pointed out, and I totally agree, that we are going to and we should keep things in our collections that are going to be controversial. But certainly things that we as librarians may not even agree with. Maybe scholars don't agree with it. But if it represents a point of view, we need to be able to study that point of view and to have a dialogue around the point of view. I don't think that banning something from the stacks of any kind of library does us any good. Now, there may be things that obviously you may not want in a grade school library, but just banning literature and these kind of things because they don't represent a narrow point of view of something, I think, is not the right way to go. To the point again in the chat about how can this happen in a country as diverse as America, I mentioned that, and I think Roxanne mentioned too, there's no destination here. This is constant work, and it's hard work, and we have to be vigilant and continue to address these things as they come up. And we're never going to be in a place, unfortunately, where they don't come up or these challenges don't come up. And I think we have to just continue to do this work and see it as continuously building a community.
That was great. Thank you, Jeff. And Roxanne? Roxanne, would you like to reply as well?
It just took a little while to get at the button. So I think there's, if you like, a Janus part about this, that for us to be fully responsible for our collections, we need to spend time to actually know what's in there that can enhance our university's mission, our researchers, our education's intentions to make the stories of diverse peoples accessible. And one of the big challenges is finding the time to have that conversation, and our traditional methodologies of working groups are just not very effective in terms of that. So we actually, with our Indigenous lead, adopted a sharing circle program where lots of interested staff got together. We knew we needed to create a better access portal and understand our collection to support Indigenous knowledge. We spent a number of sharing sessions. Then we invited everyone in the library who was interested to come, and each person who had collection knowledge, so the archivists, the map people, the law library, science library, general library, repository managers, all put together information on what they had discovered was in their collection, with a bit of nervousness that they hadn't discovered everything, on the table, so we could all become better informed together, so we could, as, if you like, a family of professionals, start to have conversations that were broader with our community about the depth of our collection, knowing that some was uncomfortable material that our staff felt uncomfortable with. One of the reasons I'm emphasising that is because no matter what you do with Mark, sometimes the most important things that will make a difference can be hidden. For example, in our archive collection, we've got about 24 kilometres of archives, trade union records, business records, including pastoral leases. And that actually includes material about Indigenous wages that were paid through the first part of the 1900s. And because we have subject knowledge of those collections, it would never have been in descriptions. When we've been approached, we've actually been able to make material accessible that's been used in wage cases by Indigenous people to seek recompense from the government, and because most of the employers didn't exist anymore, to actually create a just solution for Indigenous people. And sometimes it worries me that that sort of fine detail that will make a difference and help us understand the benefit of filling our mission is lost within the great detail that we have in our collection. And key challenges of having time to sit down and have discussions, being able to be informed as a community, and then being able to have discussions about some of the things that challenge us when we look at the word Black, and being able to bring that forward is important. And yes, other people will have different views as well. And we did in Australia have a month ago, Cumberland Library, just outside in Western Sydney, decided to pull a book that was about a family that had two same-sex parents, and happily that was overturned very, very quickly. But I think part of the challenge is sometimes there's a bit of self-censorship about the collection, and I think our traditional mechanisms do not allow us to have enough conversations about them.
Thank you. And you've both talked quite a bit about the university as community, the university in its community and serving other communities. And I think more widely, you're dispelling the idea of the ivory tower of academia. But do you think it should start before university? And the reason I'm asking that is you've both identified, and in the case of Indigenous minorities, a very colourful group of people, and then Jeff also identified disabled people as a group. They're relatively easy groups to identify, but in the UK, for example, the people who are least likely to go on to higher education are white working class boys from not particularly bad families, but they're just not interested in learning. And do you think that you could embrace it by, or help to embrace what they're doing in schools by universities working closer with schools as well? In other words, can education be made more of a continuum than it is at the moment? Either of you?
You know, I think that is a really great point. And I have to pause and think about that for a little bit. We do have engagement in the state of New Jersey through Rutgers engages with some of the high schools, and the community colleges throughout the state of New Jersey have engagement with the high schools. But I do think that there could really be a much more organized way of doing that. I was speaking with somebody who was talking about, so one of the pathways for communities that I think that you're mentioning, Linda, who don't traditionally go the college route, the engagement from community colleges presents a way for them to get a start, their 2-year colleges, and then finish up at a 4-year institution. But sometimes when we get somebody at Rutgers, they could be on one campus or another, but their experience may be better at the other campus. It's easier for somebody to transfer from a community college to Rutgers than it is to transfer in between Rutgers campuses. So I think we need to do a lot of work in smoothing out the pathway for everyone, and encouraging them, or at least providing the opportunity to get a higher education. I know in Britain, as you described, that's a whole different type of issue with a whole swath of people who wouldn't traditionally go to college. And I'd be interested to hear in your perspective or Roxanne's perspective on how we might address that as a global community.
Roxanne?
Yes, so I'm going to approach this in two ways, one slightly humorous and another one thinking about the different responsibility of different sexes. So the slightly humorous one is one of our great achievements this year. It's the 200th anniversary of the Australian Agricultural Company. We have all the records, which includes records about lots of different people, including Indigenous people in the workforce. And a highlight was that our archivist got to prepare a massive exhibition for the biggest Asian activity around beef. It's just called beef. It's not called Beef Week. Up in Rockhampton, where thousands and thousands of people who have never been to university. The Prime Minister was there as well. We've got a photo of our archivist next to the Prime Minister. And people who've never engaged in higher education are not necessarily thinking about issues outside of beef, the raising of beef and various aspects associated with it. Had many of them didn't even know we had a university in Canberra, let alone collections. And so sometimes going out into these unusual environments in the community. Our other great success was we digitised the photographs of all the pubs in New South Wales, which had been taken every decade from 1910, whatever, 20 to 1970. And we had 65 radio interviews on local radio. And we were everywhere across the whole of the state. And what that did was it reminded people that there are lots of materials that are available to help them understand whether it's the beef industry, whether it's the role of people, whether it's pubs in their local community, that we hope encouraged a sense of curiosity, of knowing that they could look for information from authoritative places like the university. And so it was not an information literacy campaign, it was just an information campaign that reached people that would not necessarily ever engage with universities or research materials. And so that's my slightly humorous one, because it still amazes me the things that we do. And the second aspect is I think there is a whole responsibility around schools and public libraries, and it still depresses me the way public libraries in the UK have been gutted. And I would really like to see more conversations with how we can better support curriculum reform in schools, even primary schools, to make a difference, because many of the children that you're talking about that are disengaged and at risk on a societal basis for all sorts of different political bad reasons don't even finish high school.
Thank you. I'm very interested in that idea of using public libraries to further the very meagre resources that colleges of further education have in this country. So thank you for that. Somebody's asked a question on AI, whether there's a future for universities because of AI. I think we won't take that question because it sort of strays outside our topic, and it is a huge question. But for Roxanne, are there any ideas on incentives for peer reviewers and awards for authors, presumably people from non-traditional backgrounds? Or do you think the work itself should be the reward?
So it's very interesting. What concerned me most when we did the report on the ANU Press that I brought to the table, and we had some really good discussions around, is that if you are a researcher or you wish to write and you're in a university, so you're being paid a salary, you are uniquely privileged and you are able to do the writing, produce a book chapter, journal article, a book, and generally supported by your institution. But there are a lot of people who have a very important story to tell, particularly around their community, around their perceptions, around that relate to whatever it is, anthropology, citizen science, who just do not have the financial resources to be able to sit down and write. So part of our focus was on looking for some philanthropy to support a program so that we could have Indigenous writers who were given a small stipend, given a mentor, and supported, because that barrier of just being able to write is a problem. I should also say that it's a problem for Indigenous academics, because they are asked to sit on thousands of committees. They are asked to be part of every project. And we really recognise that they were a group that had significant issues in getting the time to be able to do a research project, or be able to have the luxury to a degree of time that they could spend writing. So I guess I see that for authors and peer reviewers, there are different pressures for different disadvantaged groups who are inside or outside academia. And there's a whole question around the future of peer review that is solved in very different ways, and none of which are perfect. So we have about 27 different editorial boards for the ANU Press, and there are half a dozen different models for rewarding peer reviewers that the individual board decides is appropriate to their specific discipline. Is that a perfect solution? Probably not. Is it transparent? Well, really not at all. So we need to think in more detail. And my final comment is that part of the problem we're finding, and I'm sure it's not just us, is that the pressure to undertake research and teach means that it is getting harder for peer reviewers to find the time, no matter what the incentive is.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that, Jeff?
I really, what Roxanne is talking about, especially the incentives for non-traditional publishing to occur, really resonates with me. I do think the peer review process is going through a lot of change, both in what is recognized as qualifying for tenure and promotion. But it's going to take a long time for this to come into place. Again, I would harken back to the hard work we need to continue to do to foster this. I can't point to anything specifically, maybe a couple of, not so much on the peer review process, encouraging faculty. Maybe this is taking a little bit of a different direction on the question, but and reflecting back to the earlier question about pathways for underrepresented students to be able to be successful at the university, is encouraging faculty members to create texts that are at no cost. That's a big issue in the United States. Students put out sometimes thousands of dollars for their course books. And so we've got a few incentives in place for faculty to create those texts that are freely available, not only to their students, but if they're appropriate for other curriculum at other institutions. And that's a growing thing across the US as well. So I don't think that that kind of work currently fits within very well. It's not peer reviewed. And I'm not sure how much it counts for promotion and tenure, but it really helps with students who are strapped with budgets, who come from underrepresented and lower socioeconomic backgrounds to begin with. So it wasn't specifically tied to the question, I don't think, but I just wanted to reflect.
Thank you. The AI question's now been changed a bit. It's from the same person. It says, have Rutgers thought about AI and automation? I don't really see how we could automate many of the things we've been talking about, but do you have a quick answer to that, Jeff?
Yeah, you know, when I saw the first question come through in its first form too, I was kind of pondering it a bit. And I just want to reflect that artificial intelligence is really good at producing what looks like valid results, but when you dig down, it's really, really good about doing what we ask it to do or what we've trained it to do. There's not a lot of intellect within AI itself, except what we imbue it with. Reasoning, emotions, all of these things that we identify with as human beings, artificial intelligence is not there. maybe it'll get there one day. So I think the work that we do in institutions, we have to understand how we can leverage artificial intelligence to accomplish things that we think are important to get done, but we can't possibly accomplish by throwing a lot of people at it because we have limited resources. But artificial intelligence, if it's trained on what to look for in bibliographic records or other types of routine processes, it could do it 24/7 and crunch through so much content that we would just not be able to do. I don't think it's going to replace an instructor. I don't think it's going to replace instructional materials. It could be integrated into all of that to make everyone's work more efficient. But there's also a lot of problematic things behind artificial intelligence, as we know. And it's so new, and the ramifications of what it can do are so unknown at this point that we just have to try to continue to put some guardrails on it, but to also leverage what it can do for us.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that, Roxanne?
Yes, it's such a complex and new area, and it's been changing so fast. It's really at the very early stages, and so it's hard to judge it effectively, particularly given how differently it's applied in things like Copilot, ChatGPT, Paper First, all of the rest. I'm on the Australian Government's Committee on Copyright and AI, and we've just started our journey. So this week I just finished a submission or a completion of a survey for that committee from Call. And I think the thing we most identified is that there are so many things that are unknown now. It's very hard to have a clear opinion, but it has both the potential to make material more accessible by abstracting and summarising so that students can get, if you like, a step up. But it also has a whole lot of risks because it is not yet at a stage that is bias-free, and it has the potential, if we're able to completely train it in a new way, to actually implement a whole lot of the ICIP controls for us. But at the moment, it isn't fully developed. So hopefully we can contribute to the maturing of the technology and testing it.
Thank you very much. I think we only had a small live audience, but they have stayed with us longer than any other audience for any of these, actually. So huge thanks to the audience. There are many more people registered to receive the recording afterwards. And I'm sure that even more people will watch it on YouTube. I'd like to thank you hugely for your eloquence, both of you, and for your thoughtfulness about, I mean, we've talked about much wider and deeper ethical issues than we have in any of the others of these seminars so far, webinars so far. And also we've talked an awful lot about the importance of language, which I think is definitely the preserve of universities. And I was very much interested in Jeff's comment about aliens, because I don't know if either of you know this, but at JFK until quite recently, you were either a Canadian or an American, or you were an alien. And, you know, I went up to the desk, having done my 8-hour flight from the UK, and said, which queue do I go into? And they said, are you American or Canadian? And I said, no, you're an alien, Mom. And they've taken that notice down now, and it just says, are you American or Canadian or from another country? So maybe Rutgers has had an influence on them. But huge thanks to both of you. We are really grateful, and we are indebted to you for giving so much time and thoughtfulness to this. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you on behalf of the Gruyter Brill as well, for both of you, and also for Linda for the moderation. I will send the recording around to all of you, and alongside with other material, to, the topic and information on forthcoming webinars in the autumn. So thank you everyone for joining. Thanks to the speakers. Thank you, Linda and Annika. And I wish you all a wonderful summer break, and see you all in the autumn. Well rested. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.